Right. Well, welcome everyone. I'd say we'll probably have a few more people kind of trickling in as we go, but we're going to start on time because we have a lot to cover in the next 90 minutes. My name is Amy Johnston. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm the clinical director at Urban Wellness Counseling, which is a practice in the Chicago area. I am really excited to talk with you all today about the inner critic and this idea that we can focus on swapping out perfectionism by using some positive psychology strategies. So I'm hoping some of you were at some of the in-person sessions that I spoke at a couple weeks back. So some of you might be seeing me for the second time. Some of you might be brand new. So thrilled to have you. We're going to be doing these sessions once a month over the next 6 months. So you'll have lots of opportunities to learn with us. So number one, what is the inner critic, right? And the inner critic is just what it sounds like. It's that not so nice inner voice that can be really hard on us. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about what it is and why we have it. And then hopefully a little bit more time thinking about how can we calm it down and make it a little bit more positive. You're going to notice we do have chat enabled, and you will be asked to share your thoughts today. So we're going to use the chat pretty extensively. And I'm also delighted that we do have the opportunity to unmute as well. So we may have a couple chances to have people unmute and share something during the conversation. So this is going to be a lot more interesting the more you guys engage and share your own experiences and the less I talk at you. So hopefully we'll be able to get to know each other and understand all these topics together as we go. Our roadmap for the next 90 minutes. We're going to start with a check-in to see how everybody's doing as we get started. We're going to think about what is the inner critic? Where does it come from? Why do we have it? What does it sound like? We're going to focus on two things that really feed the inner critic, which are perfectionism and cognitive distortions. And then two things that we can do to calm down that inner critic. And those will be positive emotions and practices for self-compassion. And we'll actually spend some time on some very simple, but really intentional practices that we can use to develop positive emotion and self-compassion. And then we'll wrap up. So that's the plan. This is also super informal. So if you have questions or comments or thoughts, feel free to put them in the chat or unmute and ask a question or share something. This is, for you guys. So whatever you want to engage in about the topic, please do. So our check-in that we'll use the chat for is, if you're thinking about your own inner critic, that own inner voice that sometimes isn't so nice to you, on a scale from sticky note to megaphone, how loud would you say your inner critic is today? Do you have a sticky note inner critic that's just like giving you a little note on the side? Do you have maybe an inner critic that's sending you that passive aggressive text message, a little bit more mean? Or do you have somebody with a megaphone that is just shouting those nasty things at you? Where are we at today? 1, 2, or 3? Just going to check the chat and see. We've got, let's see, some 1s, some 2s, lots of 2s, a 3, a couple more 1s, 2s, 1s. Okay, so we're all over the place, which is great. We've got people that are in all these areas. We've got some sticky notes, some passive aggressive texters, and 1 or 2 full-blown megaphones out there. All right. So our goal is to turn everybody down a few notches. So if you've got a full-blown megaphone critic going on, we're going to see if we can turn the volume down on that a little bit today. If you've got a sticky note, maybe we'll even get your inner critic to be a little more kind. So we'll see what we can do. So our goal is not to silence our inner critic. Okay, you can't. We all have an inner voice. We all have that part of us that maybe isn't always sure about how well we're doing. And the idea is not to turn it off because it's part of us. Our inner critic is a part of us. But what we would like to do is learn to talk back with truth and kindness and be able to engage with your inner critic in a way that's gentle and helps the inner critic to feel less scared, less afraid, less hyperactive, right? We're going to try to make friends with it and calm it down because our inner critic usually means well. When we think about that inner critic of why it says what it says or why it's the way it is, usually it's because our inner critic is trying to keep us safe in some way from some kind of negative experience, right? Let's see if I can move my slides without, I need an extra screen here to be able to see all of you and my slides at the same time. All right. So when we think about sort of why we have our inner critic, what the point is, what it's doing for us, it's that internal voice that's going to tell you about your flaws, doubt your decisions, tell you like you're not enough, right? We've all kind of heard this from ourselves before. But the thing is, that inner critic has a purpose, and our inner critic is usually trying to do a few things. It's trying to protect us. So when we think of our inner critic as not just a mean bully, but a protective mechanism, it's really trying to shield us from potential emotional hurt, right? Because when our inner critic is preemptively judging, evaluating, making sure that our thoughts and our behaviors are okay or like fantastic, it's trying to keep us from being hurt if somebody else judges us that way. So when we judge ourselves first, it's like, oh, we're going to catch this before anyone else does. So ultimately, our inner critic is trying to offer some protection from emotional distress. It's also scanning for threats. So our inner critic is constantly on the lookout for any sort of potential sources of danger, things that could creep up on us, possible failure. And our inner critic is trying to get us to take some proactive steps to avoid whatever this potential threat might be, right? So our inner critic is trying to protect us from bad things that might pop up. And then finally, our inner critic is trying to manage emotional pain. So if our inner critic can sort of anticipate any potential negative experiences, then we can avoid that later on feeling of pain, frustration, embarrassment, whatever emotional distress might come up, because our inner critic hates distress. Now, the hard part of all this is it's a vicious cycle, because when our critic is trying to keep us safe from all of this stuff, it's also keeping us really unhappy, right? It's not a pleasant place to be when your inner critic is all over. All right, so there are two things that really feed our sense of inner critic, and that would be perfectionism and cognitive distortions. Now, there's lots of other things too that probably feed that inner critic, but these are the two we're going to focus on today because they're pretty intense in terms of how they show up. All right, so we're going to start with perfectionism. And perfectionism is really, actually, maybe, can you guys do show of hands? No, we'll put into the chat, just put in a yes in the chat if you are somebody who feels like you struggle with perfectionism. If you don't, you can put no, or you can leave it blank. But let's see how many of us out there are folks that maybe struggle with perfectionism in our own lives. Take a look at the chat while we're coming in here. We've got some yeses with capital letters and exclamation points, a couple of no's. Great. Okay, so we've got a lot of yeses, a couple of no's. If this is not something that you struggle with yourself, then this is going to be important in terms of how you're supporting your students, your colleagues, the people in your lives who do, because most people do struggle with this, right? So if you don't, that's amazing. This is going to be more about how you can use this information to take care of, support, show up for the people that do. Okay, thanks for sharing those. So perfectionism is really this idea that's characterized by having an unattainable standard that you're striving towards, right? When we're talking about perfectionism, nothing's ever perfect. No one is ever perfect. And so when we're striving for perfection, we are setting ourselves up to fail out the gate, right? It creates a constant feeling that we're inadequate all the time, that we're not good enough, and failure, right? Which then actually feeds our inner critic self-talk. So if our inner critic is like, you're not good enough, what's wrong with you? You never get it right. And we're also perfectionistic. Well, of course, we're not going to get it right because we're trying to be perfect, or we're trying to attain something that's not attainable. Cognitive distortions are really about how we're thinking about everything in our lives. Cognitive distortions, we're going to cover all of them, but catastrophizing, all or nothing thinking, they're ammunition for this inner critic, because it's giving sort of a constant stream of negative self-talk that is out of touch with reality, but feeding that inner critic's negative self-talk loop. So we're going to cover what they all are. So I like this differentiation because some people that feel kind of inclined towards perfectionism will say, well, I want to be, the best version of me, or I want to do well, or I want to give my all, right? That they think of perfectionism sometimes as a positive. But when we think of it from this point of view, that healthy striving, like wanting to be our best, wanting to do well, is very self-focused of like, how can I improve? How can I be the best version of me? How can I work in a way that feels meaningful? How can I do my best? But perfectionism is more other focused. What will people think, right? That fear and shame that comes from not doing it right. And so if your healthy striving is focused on like expansive growth and you're feeling really positive about it, then that's not perfectionism. That's healthy striving to do well. But if your striving is tinged with that feeling of shame or doubt or not enough or what other people think of you, that's a very different feeling, right? And so just taking a minute to notice for yourself the difference between those two things and maybe where you fall, whether you're more in that healthy striving place or whether you're spending more time in that, like, what will other people think? All right. So, cause and effect. Why do we have perfectionism? Or if you don't, why do the people around you or your students or the people that you care about deal with perfectionism? A lot of times it comes from this place of fear of judgment and disapproval. So perfectionism, kind of like our inner critic, is sort of a defense mechanism against judgment and disapproval. There's like a catch-22 in perfectionism, though, because we're trying to keep from being judged or feeling disapproval, but we end up feeling our own internal judgment and disapproval way more. But a lot of time, perfectionism is coming from a place of maybe not feeling good enough as a kid or the way that our parents taught us to behave, right? There's a lot of stuff that we don't really have time and space to get into today, sort of from a mental health and therapeutic standpoint. But perfectionism is, and your inner voice is, something that develops usually at a pretty young age and grows through time, right? So our childhood experiences, our community experiences, our schooling and education experiences, all of those feed into how we experience perfectionism and that inner critic and that voice in our head. But it really stems from being afraid of getting it wrong, right? A lot of people are afraid of failure. A lot of people are afraid of other people not seeing them in their best light. And the impact of that, the effect side, is really that we end up with burnout, procrastination, and a low sense of self-worth, right? So these are different impacts, but very interconnected. And we're thinking about it in terms of burnout. Why would perfectionism cause burnout? Well, when we're striving for perfect, we're tending to overwork, put in more effort than is required of us, do all the things all the time, take on things that are outside of our purview, do above and beyond, which then is going to take away our capacity to take care of ourselves, to spend time with family, to do all the things that help buffer against burnout, right? It also gives us this procrastination piece. And maybe in the chat, you can just type in a yes if you're perfectionist and also you procrastinate. Because some people feel like that would be, it wouldn't make sense, right? But if you're a perfectionist, sometimes we procrastinate because the idea of having to start something that we have to be perfect at is really overwhelming. So we put it off rather than trying to start something that we don't want to actually finish to perfection. Yeah, we've got some yeses in the chat for that, right? A couple of no's. Now, sometimes perfectionists are like, nope, I'm going to do it right now because that's their version of perfectionism. I'm going to do it now. I'm going to do it right away. I'm going to do it all the way. But some of us, and I'm more of a procrastinator, will put things off to the last minute because the dread of having to start something that I'm going to have to be perfect at can be pretty overwhelming. And then finally, that low self-worth piece. If we have unrealistic expectations of ourselves, then we're going to set ourselves up to fail. We don't do things perfectly because we can't, because we're human. And that feeds that self-talk of you're not good enough, you never get it right, you're a failure. And our self-worth is impacted by that negative self-talk. Our perfectionism was trying to keep us safe from that, but in fact, it exposed us to even more of it. So it really does become kind of a vicious cycle when you're in this space. All right. We're going to step away from perfectionism for now and talk a little bit about cognitive distortions. What are they? Why do we deal with them? Which ones of them might come up for us? So we might also call cognitive distortions thinking traps. And our inner critic is so good at latching onto these. These are like fuel for an inner critic. So we've got all or nothing thinking. We're going to cover each of these in a little bit of detail, but we've got all or nothing thinking, where things are quite black and white in our heads. We've got mind reading or fortune telling, where we're projecting what other people might be thinking or feeling or what might happen. We've got my personal favorite, catastrophizing, thinking that when something small goes wrong, it's going to lead to a massive challenge. We've got personalization and blame, which is where it's either my fault or your fault, right? We assign it to someone. And then we have discounting the positive, where we can't even accept when good things are happening because we assume that a negative thing is going to follow or it doesn't count. We are going to spend a little bit of time for you all thinking about which ones of these might show up the most for you, if any. And you can also think of this in terms of your teams and the people around you. So we've got all or nothing thinking. Oh, let's see if, yeah, there we go. All or nothing thinking. So this is really when situations are either extremely all good or extremely all bad with no middle ground. We don't give ourselves space for that gray area in the middle. So an example of that would say, if I fail this test, I'm a complete failure. I'm such a loser. I'm such an idiot. I'm so dumb. I shouldn't even be in college, because if I can't even pass this test, what's the point? Now, in reality, we know that sometimes you might fail a test, and it doesn't mean you're a failure or you don't belong in college. It means you didn't study hard enough this time around, or you misunderstood some questions, or you were having a really bad day, right? There's lots of gray area reasons to combat that all or nothing thinking, but when you're stuck in it, it's all or nothing. And the reason that this is such a great feeder for your inner critic is that when we're in this space, it really gives us a lot of negative emotions and unrealistic expectations by not paying attention to the middle ground, the complexities, leaving space for all the things that humans are dealing with as we live our lives, right? So if this is something that you feel like comes up for you, just take a little note of it, so that when we compare notes later on, we can see who comes up with which distortions. Our next one is mind reading and fortune telling. So this is when we assume that we know what other people are thinking, or if we're going to predict something that's going to happen in the future with absolutely no evidence that this is true. So this is an example of when someone's like, oh my God, they must think I'm so stupid, right? Maybe if I had this cognitive distortion right now, I could be saying, oh my gosh, I'm talking to all these people on this webinar and they're all thinking like I'm an idiot, that I don't know what I'm talking about. Or when you're going to say like, this will definitely go wrong. You know, if you're like, oh, well, it's all, it's all going to fall apart anyways. I know this is not going to be successful. We have no evidence that people think we're stupid. We have no evidence that things are not going to go well, but yet we are convinced that this is true. And this really fuels our anxiety and our insecurity, because it's when we think of guesses or assumptions as facts. And we do this all the time with therapy clients, but thoughts are not facts. We can have thoughts all day long. It does not make them true, right? I could think that a thunderstorm is coming to Chicago today, but in reality, there is no storm outside. We've got blue skies, right? My thought is not my fact. Okay, we've got catastrophizing, which is the fun one. We think of the worst possible outcome, no matter how unlikely it will be, that it's going to happen, right? So this is like, well, if I screw up this presentation, I'm going to lose my job, and then I'm going to not be able to pay my mortgage, and then I'm going to be homeless, and I will never be able to recover from that. That's really not true, right? If I screw up this presentation, it won't be great, but I'm not going to lose my job over it and then lose my mortgage and then be homeless, right? We just go from like A to Z very quickly. And catastrophizing really increases our stress levels and our fear levels because we blow things out of proportion. And then we're living in this space of stress and conflict in our own heads that impacts our ability to do things well. So again, it's one of those cycles. When we're living in catastrophe, we're not able to do the day-to-day things that we need to do. Personalization and blame. This is like a me or you kind of situation. So when we either take excessive responsibility for events outside of our own control, or we're putting blame on other people, right? We want to assign it to someone, whether it's yourself or someone else. So if a bunch of people are upset at a family dinner and you're like, oh, it's all my fault. It's all my fault. If I didn't do this, or if I didn't do that, or if only I did this, people wouldn't be so upset. Instead of letting people all have their own responsibility for their feelings. Or blaming others. This always goes wrong whenever they're involved, right? Whenever so-and-so's here, everything's a disaster. Like they screw everything up. And this can lead to feeling guilt or shame in our own stuff, or feeling a lot of resentment when you truly feel like someone else is to blame because we're not actually letting the right systems, people, experiences have accountability for problems. And our last one, I'm almost done talking at you for a few minutes, is discounting the positive. So discounting the positive is something that I feel like people don't always notice they're doing. It comes across sometimes for folks who maybe like don't like to take credit for things or feel uncomfortable with praise or think that they're being humble, but actually it's a cognitive distortion where you're dismissing your achievements or your good experiences as not being important or not being earned. You don't want to take credit for anything. So if it's like, oh, that compliment doesn't count, they were only being nice. So I have a friend who's got some pretty rough self-image and self-esteem issues. And if someone tells her she looks pretty or they like her dress or whatever it is, that's the kind of response she would say, like, oh, they're just trying to be nice, or they're just like saying that to make me feel better. They don't really mean it. I don't really look nice. Or if you do well on a test or if you do well on a presentation and someone's like, that was amazing, you worked really hard on that, like, congratulations. If you're like, oh, I just got lucky, it wasn't me, right? Not being able to take credit where it's due. And this one really does undermine our self-esteem, right? Because it's impacting our view of ourselves and it's feeding that inner critic to say, like, we're not enough, we're not worthy, things like that. So those are a lot of pieces of information for you when it comes to cognitive distortions, but it's really important that we understand how these different thought processes show up for us so that we can recognize them, number one, and then do something about it. Because as long as we're stuck in these distortions, our inner critic is having a ball, right? Our inner critic uses all of these to torture us in small ways. So we're going to do a little guessing game activity. I am going to read you out a statement, and you guys are going to guess which distortion it is. And you can do that in the chat. So let's start with, okay. They didn't respond to my email. They totally think I'm incompetent. Which one is that? Pop it in the chat. They didn't respond to my email. They probably think I'm incompetent. Yes, we've got the mind reading in there. Well done. We need like a buzzer to see who can get it in there the quickest. How about if I can't do this perfectly, I shouldn't even bother trying. Yes, all or nothing. You guys are good at this. How about I can't believe the team is struggling so much. I really should have done more to prepare them. Yes, personalization and blame. Uh, if I mess this presentation up, everyone's going to lose trust in me and my career will be over. You got it, catastrophizing. And yeah, I got good feedback in my review, but I think they were just being polite. Yep, discounting. You guys are fast. Okay. So we know which is which. We've got that under control. So my question for you guys now, in the chat, or if you want to unmute and share, that would be great as well. Totally up to you. Which one of these tends to show up for you the most? Do you tend to fall into all or nothing thinking, mind reading, fortune telling, catastrophizing, personalization, or discounting the positive? Which one tends to show up for you? Got mind reading for sure. And feel free to unmute if you want to talk about it as well. mind reading, personalization, discounting the positive, discounting, mind reading, personalization. Ooh, a catastrophizing, mind reading. Lots of mind reading up there. Mind reading, discounting, personalization, catastrophizing. Yeah, I feel like mind reading, if we did a poll, I should have done one of those where like the poll numbers go up and down in the session. Mind reading seems to be coming out on top. Catastrophizing. Yeah. Okay. Is there anybody who'd be willing to unmute and tell us a story or a little bit about a time that one of these things happened for you and what that was like? It's okay if not. I know we're just getting warmed up. Okay, we'll save that one for a little bit later. All right, so we've got a variety of different types of discounting. Oh, someone's proctoring an exam. Okay, well then you can't unmute and share with us. That's okay. You've got a good idea now of what these cognitive distortions are, how they tend to show up, right? What they look like in real time. And you've done a little bit of self-reflection on which ones come up the most for you. You're not doing anything wrong because you have cognitive distortions, right? You are not a failure or like not managing your internal voice really well. This is totally normal. Everybody does these, everybody has them. We all have ones that come up for us more than others. And these, just like that inner critic, just like perfectionism, these are things that our brains think are strategies to help us, right? When we're in all or nothing thinking, it's because our brain is super stressed out. And so when we're in stress mode, it narrows so that we can't see the bigger picture. It's actually like parts of our brain shut off and other parts light up, and it keeps us in a space of it's this or this because it makes it very simple. When there's a gray area, that feels more complicated. It feels like we need to be more engaged. And when we're in a high stress situation, your brain doesn't want to be complicated. It wants to be clear. And so it happens for a reason because our brain is trying to keep us safe. When we're doing that mind reading and fortune telling thing, we are really trying to preemptively keep ourselves from feeling that emotional pain or rejection or judgment from others. Because if we can predict what they're thinking or what's going to happen, our brain thinks that we can stay safe in that. In reality, we can't, but our brain's trying to keep us safe. Same with catastrophizing. If we jump to the worst case scenario, we can try to mentally prepare for what that might look like. The problem is the worst case scenario very rarely actually happens, right? Very rarely. And so we spend a lot of time prepping for something that's never going to happen. I talk about like why wasted worry is something that we struggle with sometimes with clients. And it's like, if we worry about something and it never happens, then we've wasted all that time worrying about something that never happened in the end. If we worry about something that does end up happening, then all of our worry was wasted because it didn't help anyways, right? Worrying about it didn't keep the bad thing from happening either. So when we're worrying about something we can't control, we're really wasting our energy in lots of ways. Personalization and blame, from a kind of a protective factors standpoint, is we like to be clear about things. We like to understand why something's happening. We like to be like logical and purposeful. And so when we can assign blame to ourselves or others, it makes us feel a little bit more grounded and settled in our brain of like, oh, that's why this is happening. We don't like uncertainty. We don't like not knowing. So our brain is trying to assign to feel better. And in the end, it's going to damage our relationships, either with ourselves or others, but our brain's not thinking about that in that moment. And then discounting the positive, again, as a protective mechanism is trying to like keep our own expectations low so that we're not disappointed when things don't work out, right? If we don't give ourselves a lot of credit, then we can kind of fly under the radar. Ultimately, it impacts our self-worth and self-esteem. But our brain's not bad, and we're not failures when we're doing this. It's just the way that our brain works to try to keep us safe. All right. A quick mid-session giggle. If your inner critic was a character from a movie or a TV show, who would they be? Pop this one in the chat. So think about what your inner critic sounds like. Are they irritated? Are they angry? Are they sad? Are they nervous? Are they like an old auntie or a little kid version? Like, who is that inner critic and who do they sound like? Aaron Walker. I love that. Ooh, Aaron Brockovich. Who else does our inner critic sound like? Like a toddler. See, our inner critics sound like all different things. Roseanne Barr. This is hilarious. I love it. I promise there's a reason for me asking you guys to do this. Who else does your inner critic sound like? I'm going to give you about 60 seconds more to think about it. Jeffrey Baratheon from Game of Thrones. Oh, I can't pronounce any Game of Thrones people. Kathy Bates. Your inner critic is Joy from Inside Out. Oh, that's a pleasant one to have. Regina George. These are so good. Okay. You guys can keep sharing those if you come up with what your inner critic sounds like, because it's great for everyone else to see as well. But we're going to talk about that like inner self-talk in a little while, but when you're thinking about your inner critic and when you're noticing any sort of negative conversation from your inner critic or like negative feedback or critical thought, I want you to really picture that character in your head, because it's important for us to separate out the inner critic from ourselves, right? It's a part of us, obviously, but when we can separate it out into that character version, you can take it a little less seriously, right? If your inner critic is just like you telling yourself you're horrible, like that's going to be pretty impactful on us. But if you can think of your inner critic as Regina George giving you some attitude, or Monica Geller giving you some attitude, it's a little bit easier to not take it so seriously, right? It just waters down the impact and the intensity a little bit if you can externalize it from yourself. And so having a specific character that you can connect with is going to be a way to water down the impact of that inner critic and treat them a little bit more kindly. You can have a little mental conversation. Will Truman, you can have a little mental conversation with Will Truman if Will's like, you suck. And you're like, okay, Will, thanks for your concern, but actually I've got this under control, right? So externalizing that voice is actually a pretty powerful practice. All right, we are nearly still on track for time. All right, here we go. So we've talked about what is our inner critic, right? Who is it? What does it sound like? Why do we have it? What are the things that feed our inner critic? So perfectionism and these cognitive distortions, right? Like seeing the world in ways that are not quite right, but ultimately because it's how our brain is trying to protect us and tell us like how to stay safe. What are we going to do about it? So what we're going to cover today, there's lots of strategies, but for the time we have today, we're going to focus on positive emotion and self-compassion, right? And specifically positive emotion from positive psychology as sort of the research framework. So when we're thinking about positive emotion, it's not just happiness. We're going to cover what other emotions there are, but there's some pretty cool research around why positive emotion buffers against this inner critic. When we think about self-compassion, I think that one is nearly self-explanatory. If our inner critic is hard on us, self-compassion is a way to nurture ourselves, even when that inner critic is pretty loud. I can't wait. I'm going to write down all of these inner critic people that you guys have. This is fantastic. Okay. When we're thinking about positive emotion, it really comes from the principles of positive psychology. So Martin Seligman is sort of like the father of positive psychology. There's a whole research area on this. But from Martin Seligman's point of view, positive psychology is about well-being. So when we think about psychology, normally we're looking at like disorders, challenges, deficiencies, diagnoses. Positive psychology is about how to build positive well-being, right? Positive in terms of like not negative, but positive in terms of constructive. So how to build well-being in our lives. And his theory is that when we make choices to maximize all these things that build well-being, we're way more able to handle challenges. We're way more able to flourish, even when all the hard stuff is happening, right? And for those of you that were in some of our full day sessions a couple weeks ago, we talked about this, right? It's not about getting rid of stressors, getting rid of problems, or getting rid of our inner critic even. It's about building ourselves up to a point where we can withstand hard stuff because we're very resilient and very robust in our well-being. And so he thinks of it in terms of 5 measurable elements that we're not going to cover all of today because we would need much more time. But he calls it PERMA, Martin Seligman. So I will also make sure that you guys, character. We'll come back to that one. Thanks, Doreen. I will also make sure you guys have a copy of these slides, and I can send any other resources out as well afterwards. So Martin Seligman talks about it in terms of PERMA, and these 5 measurables are positive emotions, engagement, and flow. Engagement is flow, and engagement is when you're in the zone where you kind of lose track of time because you're so engaged in whatever it is. So a lot of people will be in engagement or flow, like if they're playing a sport or reading a great book or like painting, doing something creative, when you get into the flow state. Having positive relationships, having a very strong sense of meaning and purpose in the world, not necessarily your work, although that's helpful, but in the world. And then a sense of achievement, success. And so when we've got these maximized, our well-being is expansive. Today, we're going to focus mostly on positive emotion. Maybe we'll dive into the other ones of these in future sessions. So cultivating positive emotion is a powerful antidote to the inner critic. The more positive emotion we're experiencing in ourselves and in our day-to-day lives, the less powerful that inner critic character is going to be. Imagine your inner critic is like, whichever one that you've assigned, whatever character you've assigned it to. Okay, if that person is feeling pretty negative in your ear, but you're actually experiencing a lot of joy in the world in that moment, that critic is going to get real quiet. So building up positive emotion, great antidote. So positive emotions, what are they? Why are we caring about them? What's important? Cheerfulness is 50% inherited genetically, which I thought was super interesting. So people that are much smarter than me have done research on genetics and have come up with this number that we're all kind of in a spectrum of cheerfulness. So when I say positive emotion, I do not mean you have to be like, yay, everything's amazing. That's just not who we all are, right? We think of our parents' temperaments, our grandparents' temperaments, how as we get older, we see ourselves turning into those versions of them. Sadly for me, I can like notice myself sounding like my grandma sometimes because our demeanors are partially inherited. So you may be someone who lives in a low to moderate range of cheerfulness. When you're incredibly happy, you may just seem like pretty neutral to someone else who lives in a much higher range of cheerfulness, who is like, yes, everything's amazing when they're happy, right? So we think of cheerfulness as a spectrum and we all live within a range of it. Our goal is not for everybody to be upbeat and what you think of as cheerful all the time. That's fake, it's phony, it's not real. What we do want is for people to think about what positive emotions they do experience when they're in a state of positivity, right? This is a feelings wheel. There's lots of words on there. It's very hard to read. I will make sure you all get a PDF of a feelings wheel afterwards. But what I'd like us to spend a little bit of time on in the chat is, and you can cheat by trying to see words on the feelings wheel, or you can try to come up with your own. But what other positive emotions besides happiness can we come up with, and how many? Let's see how many we can get. Because the research out there a couple of years ago was that most people, when put on the spot, could only come up with 3 emotions: happy, sad, angry. And that was it. So let's spend some time. Oh, you're already doing it. You guys are great. Popping in the chat. How many positive emotions can we come up with? Okay, we've got joy, satisfied, joy, accepted, peaceful, love, proud, contentment, confident, excitement. Okay, good so far. How many more can we get? Curious, inspired, ecstatic. Ooh, I like these. I mean, there are literally hundreds of positive emotions, but it's hard to come up with on the spot. Encouraged. Oh, I really like that one. Satisfied, hopeful. These are good ones. Tickled. Oh, Doreen, that's a great one. That's a nice positive emotion. I pulled a wheel online and really like cheeky. Oh, cheeky is a fun emotion. Yeah, when you're like a little jokey, a little cheeky, right? And that's not cheerful necessarily or ecstatic. It's a different type of positive emotion. I really like sassy. Oh, I like sassy too. I like thinking about positive emotions in terms of like the undercover ones, right? What are the ones that are sort of low key, as the kids would say, low key positive emotions? Peaceful, interested is one that comes up sometimes. Engaged, rested. Rested is a really nice emotion to have. Playful. Oh, you guys are doing great at this. Keep them coming, right? Because I think even reading these positive emotions gives you a little boost of those positive brain hormones that are helping us to feel good, present, playful, rested, right? When we think of positive emotion as just happiness or joy or cheer, it can actually have an opposite effect on us because those might feel unattainable depending on the situation we're in. Entertain, right? If life is hard and things are stressful and there's a lot going on, cheerfulness could feel like a pipe dream. And so then it's like, what's the point? We get in that all or nothing thinking. I'm not going to get to being cheerful, so why bother? But we might be able to feel a little sassy, or we might be able to feel rested if we just give ourselves some time. We might be able to feel content in a moment, right? So thinking about all the different ways that we can feel a positive emotion that doesn't have to be that like 10 out of 10 happy, cheerful, joyful piece. And I think that we don't always think about that. So there's lots of ways to find positive emotions in ourselves that are a little bit outside the box. All right. You guys can keep adding emotions if you want to. I think that's a pretty fun activity and positive exercise for you. So what are some of the powers of positive emotion? Why do I want you to build positive emotions? So another author to add to your list if you want to is Barbara Fredrickson. And she wrote a book called Positivity. And she has a theory called the broaden and build theory. And what she means by broaden and build are when we're experiencing more positive emotions, it broadens possibilities because it literally helps our mind to see the bigger picture. So this is what I was talking about before in terms of like when we're looking at like brain MRIs and how things are lighting up when different things are happening. When people are feeling very negative, their brains narrow. The parts of their brain that are lighting up decrease because they're focused very much on like threats, safety, things like that. So the parts of our brain that are involved in keeping us safe are full on. But when we're feeling positive emotions, the parts of our brains that deal with creativity, collaboration, thinking outside the box, innovation, all of those parts of our brains are able to turn on. So when we're focusing on building positive emotion, we're helping create more space in our brains to see the big picture, right? To broaden our experience and to be able to think outside the box. And we can't do those things when we're in a negativity spiral. The build part is about building our resources. When we're feeling positive emotions, it actually changes how our brains function. It increases like neuroplasticity and the different connections that are happening in our brains. It lights up the parts of our brains that are those like activity and creativity and learning centers. So we're building resources. Also, sidebar when we're positive, we're building relationships, connections, right? Those PERMA things, they're not all separate buckets. They're interactive and interchangeable. When we're feeling positive emotions, we're also likely building our relationships, building our support networks, engaging with others, right? So different things are all happening together. And then a note for it is, like we were saying a little bit ago, the idea of building positive emotion is not about being happy all the time. Absolutely not. It's about being able to tolerate the negative emotions, to be able to not let them impact us as much, to be able to buffer against the hard stuff when it happens. So when we're talking about building positive emotions, it's not like, let's all be positive when things are actually really hard. It's how do we insert some positivity into situations, even when they're hard, right? How can we buffer against that? How can we soak in and kind of bank positivity when we're in a good space so that when things are harder, we've got something to draw from? So that's kind of why we want to use positivity in this way. A tricky part about positive emotions is that this is a pretty good way to illustrate it. Your brain is like Velcro for negative experiences, but Teflon for positive ones. And what we mean by that is your brain holds on to negative stuff really tightly. If something negative happens or you have a negative emotion, your brain's like, yep, I feel that. This is really bad. We hold grudges. We're irritable. We're resentful. We're angry. Negative stuff sticks. Positive ones in the moment are great, but they tend to bounce and kind of disappear much more quickly. It's harder to hold on to the impacts of positive emotions. And that's probably because of our brain and our nervous system's drive for safety, right? By holding on to negative experiences, we're storing information that can keep us safe in the future. Things that are perceived as threats or dangerous, we hold on to because it's our way to try to like navigate future harm. Whereas positive experiences are nice in the moment, but our brain doesn't see that as quite as useful in terms of keeping us safe in the future. Again, our brains are working real hard to try to keep us, safe here, but it doesn't always work out the way that your brain wants it to. So the reason that's important is because Barbara Fredrickson, again, came up with this idea of the positivity ratio. And so her point or her theory is that we need 3 times the positivity in our day as we do negative to counteract those negatives. So we need 3 positive experiences for every 1 negative, or 3 positive feelings for every 1 negative, just to keep ourselves balanced out, because negative experiences are more powerful. So we need way more positive emotion to balance out negative emotion. Most of us don't have this ratio down yet. What I invite you to do, if you want to, is to open up another tab in your screen or on your phone and put this web address in. Let's see if I can put it into the chat for you. And it's going to pop up a little quiz. It can take you just 2 or 3 minutes to do, and it's going to give you your positivity ratio. Let's see. I can tech the chat. Here we go. I'm going to have to type it in by hand. Oh, if I could spell, that would be helpful. positivityratio.com/single.php. Okay. I would encourage you to click that link. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. Hold on. There we go. Here we go. Click on that link and just take a couple of minutes to give yourself the positivity quiz. And I think if the instructions are clear in my head, it's asking you to think about how you have felt just in the last 24 hours. So the positivity ratio is a snapshot of how you're doing right now. So if you just had a great day, your positivity ratio is going to be a little higher than maybe your average. If you've had a terrible day, it might be a little lower than average. The benefit of this little quiz is that you should give it to yourself every week, same day, same time, or every 2 weeks, or once a month, or whatever that is, to kind of gather data over time to see how your positivity ratio averages out. First time you do it, it's not as reliable. But once you finish your positivity quiz, I'm going to ask you to put your ratio into the chat. So 3 to 1 is the ideal ratio, positive to negative, but sometimes we're flipped upside down. Sometimes we're like 1 positive to 4 negative, and that's okay. It's information that we can use. So when you're finished with your quiz, pop in the chat what your ratio is. Or feel free to unmute and share your ratio with us. One 1.29, 0.56. So the closer you are to 3 or higher than 3, the more positive you are. The lower you are, the more negativity you've got going on right now. 1.29, 0.56, 233. Jennifer, you're pretty good up there. 1.25, 0.25, 0.29, 88, a 10. Terry's in good shape. Another 10. Okay. Now, I don't want, someone had a sad face by theirs. This is not intended to make you feel bad about your ratio, right? This is information that's really helpful for you to use because you probably haven't thought of it in these terms before, right? So if you're feeling a pretty high negativity balance over the last day or so, thinking through, has anything particularly rough happened in the last day or so? Have I been intentional about adding any positive experiences into my day? Am I just always irritated on a Wednesday because it's the day of our staff meeting and that's always a bummer for me, right? You're going to want to redo this ratio maybe next week on a different day or a different time to sort of see if things are a little bit different. If your ratios are consistently low, it's really important to start looking at how do I start adding in more of those positive emotions that we listed into your day-to-day to try to increase that positivity ratio. A little bit more for the chat. When you're looking at those different questions of like, how much have you felt this or that or this or that, which positive emotions tend to live in you the most easily? So I would like this one in the chat. Of all the ones we listed, contentment, excitement, ecstatic, sassy, all those things, what positive emotions tend to be the most comfortable for you? Which ones do you most tend to experience? Which ones come up for you the most? Which ones do you spend the most time in when it comes to positivity? Content. That's a nice one to spend time in. Let's see. Thankful, love, content, hopeful, encouraged. These are really good ones to be in. Okay, curious. That's a nice one to spend time in. Content, gratitude. Excellent. And then while you're thinking about which emotions live in you the most easily, because here's what I'm going to also remind you of. Sometimes we think in terms of like, what are we deficient in and how do we boost it? But if you're like, oh, I never really feel ecstatic, I have to figure out how to feel ecstatic. No, you don't. Maybe that's just not part of your range. But what I would like you to do is think about which one you feel the most ease with and how do we continue to build on that. So if you already feel like gratitude is something that you pretty easily spend time in, great, let's build on that, right? This is strength based. So how do we take the thing that we already can access pretty easily and grow it? If you're feeling like playful is pretty easy for you, fantastic. Let's dip into playfulness as much as possible because emotions are interconnected. And when you're feeling playful, then you can also kind of tap into some other stuff as well. It branches out. But positive psychology is about like building on the strengths, using what we've got and growing from there, not about trying to do the hard thing. And so second part of that question is what brings you into a state of whatever that is? So Marcus, you said playful. What brings you into a state of playfulness, right? What are the activities, the actions, the people, the places that help you to be into that space? If you're saying like contented, being content is your emotion that makes you kind of the most comfortable, what helps you to get into that state of contentment? And so when we're trying to think of this as a strategy, it's not just like, oh, be more playful. We have to think of the action step that comes before that. What do you need to do? What action do you need to take to bring more playfulness into your experience, right? See, being present in the moment, keeping a balance between giving and taking. That's a really good one. What else? Any other folks that can share in the chat? Oh, too far. What brings you into that state of positive emotion? What actions help you to be in that place you like to be? Reading for pleasure, to learn more and learn more stories. Yes, these are great examples, right? This is not rocket science. Experiencing things through my kids, that's a great one. Listening to upbeat music, being outside, exercising. Yes, these are great examples. Family. Family can go either way for some of us. Sunlight, my son, anything around my son. My 9-year-old asked me the other day, Mom, do you enjoy parenting? I said, I do. Most of the time, I really do. He also asked me if I regret anything about becoming a parent. Like, these are deep questions for a Tuesday morning. But when we're trying to think about how to grow our positivity ratio, if you had a low number and you were like, yikes, that's kind of low, it's not just like, okay, fine, I have to find more joy. No, we have to kind of dial that back into the building blocks of what creates those positive emotions. So what actions, activities, thoughts, behaviors, places, people do we need to be spending more of our energy on so that those positive emotions flourish, right? All right. So some tools for cultivating positive emotions. All of the things that you guys just listed are super powerful, right? What activities bring us into that state? These are a couple of more internal tools for cultivating positive emotions. So one is gratitude journaling. And so those of you that were with me a few weeks ago, I think I talked with most of the groups about this, that like, I don't love the journal 3 things you're grateful for every day practice. It works for some people. For me, I kind of get bored with it over time. But this one is actually really helpful because it's a different one every day. And it also helps us with self-compassion. So like these are all intertwined, right? These are not separate buckets. So a gratitude journaling prompt is, what did I do well today, even if imperfect? And adding the imperfect is a powerful piece of that question, right? What did I do well doesn't mean what did I do perfectly or amazingly at, like what did I do well? And I'm trying to think about for my own self. I'd love you guys now to either in the chat, if you are open with sharing, open to sharing, or unmute, or if not, journal for yourself on this one just for a minute. What did I do well today, even if imperfect? And I think today I did well at parenting this morning. So we had a lot to get organized this morning. We've got a busy afternoon and a few different moving pieces. And sometimes when I get stressed out because our mornings are hectic and we're trying to get out the door, I get a little snippy or I don't show up the way I want to. But I feel like we had a really nice morning, even with the busyness and even trying to get a few things organized, where I was able to show up well momming in a way that we had a little bit of a laugh, kind of had a nice morning. Although I did have to send my daughter back upstairs to change her clothes because she's 11 and she came down in something that looked like she was either going to the pool or the gym. We had to fix that. Let's see, we've got facilitating a meeting. I felt sick this morning and I was able to still be nice getting my son out the door. Yeah, when we're not feeling well, but we can still kind of show up the way that we want to for someone, that's helpful. Prioritizing exercise despite feeling sore and not wanting to. Oh, Lacey, I'm feeling you on this one. I started a strength training class last week. So Tuesday and Thursday mornings, I'm exercising at 6 a.m. I don't recommend it. It's the only time of day I can get it done. And my whole body hurts real badly. Yeah. What else did we do well today, even if imperfect? This is an important practice. So you can share in the chat. We'd love to hear more. The more we hear from others, the better. It's really good for us to hear other people's stuff too. But if not, journal that on your own. All right, I'll let you guys keep chatting while I move to another really simple but powerful practice, and it's called a savoring practice. And so a savoring practice is when we recall a recent joy and we spend a minute or two really thinking about it. So I'm going to ask you all now to, in your mind, picture, imagine a recent joy that you had. It could be anything from drinking a delicious cup of coffee this morning to having the sun on your face to having a laugh with your kids or something even bigger, right? And more complicated. But I want you to picture it in your mind and really spend a minute thinking, what did it feel like? Who was there? Did it taste like anything? Were there any smells or scents when it was going on? What did it sound like to have this moment of joy? Were there any sounds or was it quiet? Were you with other people or were you on your own? And what could you see? Visualize what it looked like to have that moment of joy. And then what was it the feeling in you, right? Was it a warmth or a softness? And when you take that 30 or 60 seconds to just savor a joy, it helps to release all those positive emotion hormones in our brain. So we can do that from thinking about a joy we've recently had. We can also practice savoring in the moment. So if you're doing something that's bringing you some joy or some positive emotion, just being in it for a little bit longer. So instead of taking for granted your hot cup of coffee, which is a little cold now, but I'm going to do it anyway, taking for granted, like, oh, drink a sip of coffee, like, yeah, give yourself a moment to taste it, notice it, be in it. And that savoring, that giving yourself that extra beat to stay in it helps to solidify that joy, that positivity a little bit more. Because like we said, Velcro for negativity, Teflon for positivity. So we have to be more intentional about when we have a positive experience, holding it. Our brain's not going to hold it automatically. We have to be intentional to hold it a little bit longer. And then a final tool for today for cultivating positivity is acts of kindness. So small acts have a really big ripple. When we can do something, even a small thing for someone else, it really does impact the trajectory of their day. And you never know what that act of kindness is going to do for someone. So my colleague that I train on this with sometimes, she used to be an attorney and she worked in a big practice. And she tells a story of when she was working as an attorney and actually going through some really terrible mental health stuff of her own. She parked her car in the same garage every day. And the parking attendant was the most kind, most lovely human that she's ever met. And every day he would have a chat, a smile, say something kind to her, and just radiate kindness, hold the door, whatever it was. But she knew that every day when she met this guy, it was going to be an anchor of positivity for her in an otherwise really difficult time. And she went back later on and she told him that, right? When she was feeling better, and actually, I think when she was leaving that job, she did stop in and say, hey, I just want you to know that your kindness every morning when I was in actually the depths of despair and you didn't know it was a lifeline for me. Like that one moment every day made a difference. So your act of kindness is going to have a big ripple in the world. It's also going to help you to feel more positive emotion. All right. How are we on time? Get you all out of here on time today, I promise. All right. We're actually in good shape. Okay. Since we have a minute, we're actually on time for chat. I would love for you guys to share in the chat an act of kindness that you either have experienced from someone else recently or an act of kindness that you've offered. Anything small, doesn't have to be anything major. But what's a little act of kindness that you've either experienced from someone or given to someone lately? I know we've got kind people out there. You've all done something kind or experienced something kind. Oh, I saw an old neighbor at a restaurant and they picked up my dinner tab. That is so nice. It's going to sound weird, but someone let me know they had a tougher experience than me when I was feeling really personal about it. Okay. Nope, that's common humanity, Jenny. We're going to actually get to that as a topic later in the conversation. And that's exactly what that is, that sense of common humanity. Thanks for sharing that. I brought food to my boss because I was the coolest students it was the coolest students end of the year buffet, and she was stuck on a Zoom. Oh, feeding people is my love language. Yes. Picked up candy for my husband, friends and neighbors carpooling my children to baseball practice and games. Yep. And these little kindnesses mean so much when they add up over time, right? Every time somebody does something to take care of you, especially when it's really thoughtful. Coworkers offered birthday cake yesterday, even if I didn't partake. Invited our only Asian American staff member to lead a conversation on AAPI month, dismantling stereotypes. And she thanked me for giving her a voice. These are great. Keep going, because I think it's really important for you guys to share them with each other as well. Planted some tomatoes for an older person who isn't able to do this anymore. Oh, I love this so much. Veterans collecting donations. I dropped in a donation. It turns out it was a former coworker that I had not seen in a few years, and his genuine excitement to see me changed my whole disposition. Took a coworker for coffee after she got a ticket on the way to work. Oh my gosh. We have a brand new therapist who's a new grad, and he just moved to Chicago from somewhere not Chicago, and he's gotten his car booted twice in 1 week. I don't even know how that happens, but his supervisor had a lot of coffee dates going for him this week. Lots of kindnesses. I'll also tell you that reading all these kindnesses that you guys have put up there is giving me all the warm feels and growing my sense of gratitude and positive emotion, right? Hearing about other people's kindnesses is almost as good as doing them yourself. I received donations for a St. Jude's fundraiser I'm part of. These are so important. Thank you so much for sharing these, guys. And please feel free to keep going, because the more kindnesses you share, the more positive emotion you are spiraling upward for everybody in the group. Right? Small acts have a big ripple. My husband did all the dropping off and picking up of the children for me yesterday, because my kids are very involved in lots of activities, so that I could stay home and finish this, finalizing the edits on this presentation for you guys. It was kind of him because it was a lot of driving. All right. So we're pretty well versed now on how to cultivate some positive emotions. The final skill we're going to talk about for the last 15 minutes or so is building self-compassion. And this one is a little trickier for people, right? Self-compassion can feel a little edgy sometimes because it really does rely on us giving ourselves a break. And if our inner critic is strong, and think about your little character, if that inner critic is strong and loud and has a lot to say, self-compassion might not come easily for us. And it is a practice. And when we call something a practice, it means we may not be good at it right away, and we have to build it over time, right? We could do, again, an entire day just on self-compassion. So this is a primer on self-compassion, and we may get a little bit more into this later in the year. But 3 strategies for self-compassion, and these, I don't have her name on here, but these come from Kristen Neff, N-E-F-F, who is sort of the mother of self-compassion practices, are self-kindness, shared humanity, or common humanity, we sometimes call it, and mindfulness. So we're going to talk about a quick, simple practice for each of these that you can work on and incorporate. And not all of these appeal to everyone, so it's like a buffet of options. You pick and choose what's good for you. So first, we're going to talk about self-kindness. The easiest way to build a self-kindness practice is to flip the script, I sometimes call it. And so when your inner critic is being critical, I want you to really think about, what would your dearest friend say to you instead, right? So you got to take your inner critic character off your shoulder, put him in a drawer or something, and imagine that your dearest, oldest friend, or the person that loves you the most in the entire world, was talking to you instead. What would they say? You can write this out like a little letter to yourself, if that's helpful. Some people actually writing and journaling these help to sort of solidify and integrate the practice. But it really is sort of a mental practice or journaling practice where you take your inner critic, imagine putting them away somewhere, saying thank you, but no thank you. And then imagine in your mind, or look at a picture of, actually, I was at a training a couple weeks ago where someone told me I actually can't picture things in my mind. I don't have that ability. So when you say imagine, it's really hard for me to follow. So Imagine in your mind if you can, or look at a photo of someone who loves you dearly, really cares about you, and really replay that conversation, right? What is that person going to say to you? There's a flip of this too, where sometimes you can think of like, what would you say to the dearest person to you if they were going through this? So if I got my car booted twice in 1 week, like this poor new therapist did, my inner critic might be saying, "You are such an idiot. How did you manage to get your car booted twice in 1 week? Like, that is ridiculous. You don't even know how to park. Clearly, something is going on for you." And it's like, okay, thank you for that. I'm going to put you aside for a minute. And then I think of my best friend. And if I called her and said, "I'm such an idiot. I just got my car booted twice in 1 week," she's going to say, "You must have a lot on your mind. You must be really stressed out right now if you ended up parking in a couple of places where you really couldn't, right? That was a big deal to get two boots, but you're not a horrible person. You made a mistake, right? And like, we'll pay the boot and it'll be okay and it'll come off, and we're going to have to pay more attention in the future to where you park your car." Right. So it's not about, some people think of self-kindness as like letting yourself off the hook for things, and they don't like that idea. That's a lot of the pushback I get on self-kindness of like, oh, it's just letting yourself off the hook. It really isn't. It is really about what would a kind-hearted, loving person say in that situation. And we can be kind-hearted and loving to everyone around us and then really horrible to ourselves. And we are the person that we really need to take care of the most of anyone. So flipping that script on self-kindness is a helpful strategy. Shared humanity. So I think one of you earlier had said this was going to sound like a weird thing, but someone shared that they'd also had a hard time with something, or they had a harder time with it. So I might be wrong. I might not be picking up your statement the right way, but it made me think of this strategy of shared humanity, that there are people everywhere in the world who are struggling. And it's not about comparative suffering. It's not like, oh, well, other people have it harder, so I should be grateful. That's not always very helpful because our struggle is still our struggle. Okay, great, Jenny. But the idea that we are all in this together in the world, that like human beings as humans all experience suffering. It's part of the human experience. So something could be really hard for us, and something could be even harder for someone else. And it doesn't mean our suffering's not valid. It means that we are all experiencing hard things, right? We're not alone. We're not isolated, because feeling isolated and alone compounds negative feelings. So if we're feeling upset or scared or whatever it is, but we're in community with other people who understand our experience, it lightens the impact of that negative experience. If we're feeling scared, frightened, angry, sad, whatever it is, and we're isolated and alone, it compounds that negative experience, right? So the just like me reflection is really this idea that everyone in the world has a similar experience that we do in some way, shape, or form. And it's creating sort of invisible bonds and connections between people. So it's just a silent reflection that you can sit and say to yourself. If you think of the person sitting next to you, or me through the screen, or your partner at home, and thinking like, this person has hopes and fears just like me. This person struggles and wants to be loved just like me. This person makes mistakes and is learning as they go, just like me. And so it really is reflecting some of the struggles that you're having and reflecting that other people are also experiencing that. It's a very simple sort of mental practice to do, but it is really powerful when you do it consistently, because it takes us out of that space of isolation. You can repeat it when you're in a crowded place, right? You could be in a place full of strangers, and you could be thinking, these people all have hopes and fears just like me. All these people are struggling and want to be loved and want to be successful just like me. You could repeat it to yourself in a meeting. So maybe if you're in the middle of a presentation and feeling like you screwed something up or you got it really wrong and you're a little embarrassed, you could say, everyone at this table has made a mistake just like me. You could say it in a moment of frustration, right? I always bring my kids into the example because like I yell at my kids when my window of tolerance is really small. And if I've just like had an emotional outburst and yelled at my kids or been a mom that I didn't love, I can reflect and say, all moms have had moments where they've gotten frustrated and yelled at their kids, just like me. Or even looking at my kids and saying, everyone loses their temper sometimes. My kids lose their temper sometimes, just like me. And so it's a simple practice, but very powerful in how we use it. And then our final strategy of the day is mindfulness. And mindfulness is a buzzword. Everybody's heard of mindfulness. Everybody knows that mindfulness is a practice, but we don't always think through like, what do we really mean by mindfulness? And so there's different types and different levels and different practices. But in terms of self-compassion, when we talk about mindfulness at its most basic, we're really thinking about mindfulness in terms of being present, paying attention, noticing, and allowing. Because self-compassion can be a struggle when we don't want to allow, accept, acknowledge, or experience the hard thing. So when our inner critic is full rage, oh, thanks, Kendra. When our inner critic is like fully raging at us and we're not practicing self-compassion, it's partially because we don't want to actually pay attention to those deeper, harder inner feelings, right? Self-compassion means noticing and allowing those uncomfortable feelings to exist in us. So our inner critic might be keeping us angry or anxious or motivated or running, but our inner critic is actually not letting us drop into the real feeling. Our inner critic is trying to protect us from the real feeling. It's trying to protect us from danger, from distress, from all those things. It's not doing it in a nice way, but it is trying. So mindfulness and self-compassion is about allowing ourselves to drop in and notice and allow whatever feeling is coming up and just be okay with it. So self-compassion at its core is saying, this is uncomfortable and this is part of being human and this is okay. And negative experiences happen and I can tolerate them. And I'm going to make mistakes, and that's part of the human experience. Self-compassion is allowing negative things to happen, to sit and feel it, and then to move through it, right? So it's not holding on to it or like wallowing in the negativity. It's like thinking about waves in an ocean. They're going to wash up and then they're going to wash back, and then they're going to wash up and they're going to wash back. And we're not trying to avoid it or stop it, right? We can't stop the waves in an ocean. We can allow them. So a little self-compassion practice is put your hand on your heart or any place in your body where you might be feeling. Some people feel in their bellies instead, or feel in their jaws or whatever it is, but hand on your heart or hand on your belly. And if you're feeling an uncomfortable feeling, when you're feeling an uncomfortable feeling, you just say to yourself, this is a moment of suffering. This is a hard experience. This feels really uncomfortable. This is a moment of me feeling pretty anxious. And allowing it and letting it be with you. And we're not trying to change it or shift it. And that is a very challenging part of self-compassion. Self-compassion is sitting with how we are and not trying to change it or judge it. It's not good or bad. It just is. And so from a mindfulness point of view, we're just staying with it. And the thing with feelings is once we tend to it, once we name it, once we allow it, it often leaves. Feelings are fleeting. Feelings aren't forever. They're not permanent. We feel thousands of feelings all the time. And so we sometimes say name it to tame it. If we can say, this is a moment of suffering, this is a moment of discomfort, once we name it, it lightens. And some moments are going to last for longer than others, but we're not trying to judge it, chase it away. We're not trying to eradicate it. We're trying to be kind with it. Like, it's okay that I feel this way. This is hard. Everybody take a deep breath in, deep breath out. Another big deep breath in and an exhale. All right. So that was a lot for you all to take in a short amount of time. But while we wrap ourselves up these last few minutes, I would like to hear from you all in the chat, or again, feel free to unmute if you want to. What's one thing that you're taking with you today? Maybe one skill or tool that you're going to try to apply for yourself. Or if you can't come up with one of those right now, what's one word to describe how you're feeling at the end of this time together? Just see what people are taking out. Content. Terry's very content today. I love that. We practiced our feeling words. Reminded. Validated. Name it to tame it. Yeah, it was a last minute entry you just got there, but name it to tame it is really powerful. Once we say what it is, it has a lot less power over it. Feeling okay. Acceptance of feelings. What else are we doing? Name it to tame it. Yep, that's a good one. Anybody else have a takeaway or a feeling? Okay. So we're right about on time. We have a couple of minutes for some questions. Oh, we've got surprise because we had no idea what to expect. Strength-based strategy. Sit in what you, yes, the strength-based building on your positive stuff. Okay. Survey. Oh, right. Reminder. So you can use that survey link, like I said, and I would give yourself every week or every 2 weeks, take it again because it's only meant to be a 24-hour snapshot. So one of them on its own isn't as helpful. But when you do it every week or every 2 weeks or every month or however often you want to check in on it, you can look at, if you're a data nerd, you can look at that over time and see what your average is. And also pay attention to like blips, right? If you just got married and you're super happy, then you're going to have an unnecessarily high or unrealistically high ratio that day. If something really rough happened, it's going to be low. So doing that over time can be really powerful. But so to wrap up what we covered today, we covered what is the inner critic? Why do we have it? What purpose does it serve for us? How does perfectionism and how do cognitive distortions help to feed that inner critic? And then what are some strategies from positive psychology, like building positive emotion and building self-compassion, help to buffer against the intensity of that inner critic, right? So we've got our character inner critic. We're going to talk to them kindly and gently. And we're going to try to turn them down a little bit without trying to eradicate them. So thank you so much for all being here today. It's my email address. If you have thoughts or questions that you want to connect with me about afterwards, please feel free to shoot me an email. And I will make sure that you guys have these slides and some references to the authors that I talked about today. So got a couple of moments for questions if anybody has one. And if not, you just got 4 minutes of your day back. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Amy. That was absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.